All right, well, we will go ahead and get started. It is exactly 11 a.m., so I just want to be mindful of everyone's time. All right. Well, today's session will be recorded. So, in case we are not able to capture everyone today, we will have it recorded and shared out early next week so that you will have access to it. But happy 529 Day. We are so thankful for you all being here with us this morning and attending our Spring into Savings webinar. So, I am Tia Anderson. I am Program Services Representative for NC 529, North Carolina's College Savings Plan, as well as NC Assist, which is an alternative loan offered at college foundations supporting students who are needing to bridge the gap between the cost of attendance and financial aid. So, super excited to be here. I also have an additional support person here with me today, Emmanuel Brooks, who also serves on the NC 529 Savings team. So, Emmanuel will be here to support us during our Q&A session later on in the webinar. But again, thank you all for being here. We have Kate Freeland as well on the call. She will be supporting me within today's webinar. In case there are any questions that come up in the chat, she will be able to support us in the conversation. So again, thank you all for being here. Before we jump into the conversation, I would love to know where we have individuals joining us from. So if you are able to do so, and if it's safe to do so, if you are able to go in the chat and share with us where you are, maybe you are joining us virtually, maybe you're outside of the state of North Carolina. However you are able to join us today, we would love to know where you're joining us from. I will tell you, I am here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Emmanuel is as well. Our home office here at CFNC is located in Raleigh. So if you are able to in the chat box, please feel free to share with us where you are joining from. All right. And Kay, if you're able to just give us a thumbs up, are you seeing those chats coming through?
Actually, I am having trouble on
Okay.
my end, but if you give me just a minute, I will be able to look in better detail.
Okay. So for the sake of time, we will move forward. But again, we thank you all for being here and joining us. So today's conversation, just to share with you some of our discussion points, we do realize that we may have individuals today that are new to NC 529. We may have participants here who have been a part of the plan for quite some time, or some that are just here and really wanting to figure out more information about the plan. We will be covering a few discussion points. First, we'll talk about saving with an NC 529 plan, what the plan consists of here in the state of North Carolina, as well as get into logistics of the future of the plan, some things to be mindful of. And then as we're approaching the summer, getting into a new school year this fall, we'll talk about some saving strategies just to be aware of. So, what is a 529 plan? So, federal law allows states to develop these qualified tuition programs that allow individuals and families to start saving for future education. So, here in the state of North Carolina, we do have the NC 529 plan that supports families in saving for those future educational expenses, whether that's college, K through 12, and allowing there to be a saving vehicles for families to consider. So, super excited to have that here in the state of North Carolina. As those contributions are being made to the plan, the growings are tax-free as long as they're being used towards educational expenses. So earnings are tax-free when used towards education, but also those withdrawals are free from federal and state taxes if they are being used towards those qualified expenses. So we'll talk a little bit more about what makes an expense qualified. I know that comes up pretty often, especially when we talk about these educational expense, like what is educational, what's considered qualified. So we will be having that conversation as well during today's webinar. So North Carolina's NC 529 plan was authorized by the North Carolina General Assembly in 1996. So that is where in the state of North Carolina, the plan was created. It is established and maintained by our neighbors at North Carolina State Education Assistance Authority. So we're super grateful for them. I call them our neighbors because here in Raleigh, North Carolina, we are literally next to each other. So we appreciate their support within the plan, but it is administered by College Foundation Incorporated. So the organization, College Foundation, does operate the day-to-day operation of the plan. So super excited to have this great benefit here in the state of North Carolina. So North Carolina's NC 529 plan, it is open to residents of any state. So we may even have individuals on today's call that are not necessarily in the state of North Carolina, and that is possible. So it's open to any residents of any state. There is direct enrollment through the plan through CFI, so cfnc.org. You're able to enroll in the NC 529 plan there, and it is completely free to enroll. And we'll talk exactly about how that looks on our site. The plan is accessible for families. It's affordable with our minimum contribution being as low as $25. Again, those tax-free earnings on the contributions when those funds are being used towards qualified educational expenses. And it's flexible for families. There's a number of ways for you to utilize the plan for your family and what really works best moving forward. And comprehensive when we talk about your level of risk, especially associated with investments. So we'll definitely do a deep dive into each of those and how those really work specifically with the plan. So let's talk a little bit about why even starting an NC 529 plan. So one thing that we know is that college isn't necessarily getting any cheaper. So here in the state of North Carolina, we've seen with our partners within UNC system universities that tuition has been pretty consistent, but there is still other expenses associated with college. And we know that with the cost of living, things are just getting a little bit more expensive. So starting an NC 529 plan does allow the potential of college being affordable for families when they're starting to save early and consistently. We've also seen that there is the conversation of alleviating debt. So whether that's student loan debt, maybe that beneficiary taking out loans just to make college work, or debt on the parent side, right? The parent or the guardian that's taking out additional debt just to make ends meet. So using the NC 529 plan does alleviate some of those financial stressors that may come about with affording college. But also most students and most children, young adults that know that there has been some money set aside for them for college tend to explore college as a pathway. So for many of them, maybe as they're young within their NC 529 plan, you may have some that are fairly young and may not even realize that it exists. They're maybe not seeing the impact now, but in high school and when they're making those decisions about career pathways and what they're interested in, if they're knowing that there's some money set aside, they tend to be more interested in pursuing college as a pathway. So let's talk a little bit about the features of the plan and how the plan works for families. So first, it is accessible, right? Any adult can open an NC 529 plan to help anyone who plans to go to college, right? So most commonly you're hearing about it being children and grandchildren, maybe nieces or nephews, but you may have individuals that are saving for their neighbors or saving for a friend of theirs. So as long as you are over the age of 18, you are able to open a NC 529 plan and save for anyone who has plans to pursue college in the future. And something that comes up pretty often is the fact that you can even save for yourself. So a lot of times families are making sacrifices, especially as their family is growing. You may have a child that is going off to college and you as a parent may have chose to put your education on hold. You can choose to use the NC 529 plan as well as for yourself if you are choosing to pursue college in the future. So just something to be mindful of, as we do realize that we have a number of adult learners here in the state of North Carolina. So it is affordable. So there's no enrollment fee with enrolling in the NC 529 plan. There is a minimum contribution as low as $25. So anytime you're contributing to the plan, as long as you're contributing at least a minimum of $25 per beneficiary, that's the minimum contribution level. We take pride in there being low total annual asset fees, unless you're someone that is maybe interested in courier delivery or paper statements coming to your home. There may be some very low fees associated with that, but mostly very low fees. And pride in knowing that you contribute when, whether that's on occasion or regularly, and how you would like to contribute. So we have some individuals that choose to contribute, within lump sums. They may be dropping off funds within their plan 2 or 3 times throughout the year. Or we may have some that are choosing to contribute more often, maybe through payroll deduction. So really depending on what works best for that family, we are working closely to make it affordable for families to use NC 529s as a savings vehicle that allows them to plan for the future. So lump sum contributions. So there has been the conversation of, families that maybe have lived in other states. So maybe you were once in a state that had a 529 plan. You can choose to roll over those funds into a NC 529 plan. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to, but there is the ability for you to do so. We realize that there's other saving vehicles, maybe a Coverdell account that you have. If you have funds within another account that you would love to roll over to an NC 529 plan, it is acceptable. And we can accept those through personal check, electronic funds transfer, which tends to be most popular, as well as money orders, if that is something that your family is interested in. When we think about automatic contributions, you may have set up within your account to have an account draft come out maybe once or twice a month. If you're choosing to do so, you can choose the dates that you want those funds to come out of your account, right? So we're allowing the flexibility there for you to make the decision of how you're contributing to your account, but as well as the fact that we do have payroll deduction. So we have a number of employers across the state of North Carolina that also have NC 529 built into their benefits package. So if you are someone that, has an employer that honors NC 529 and you're choosing to enroll into payroll deduction, you may choose to have that money taken directly out of your check and going into your plan. So kind of in a way hands off with it, but you still have full access to go into your account and to see kind of how your money is growing over time. So we talked a little bit about the tax-free earnings on the plan. So as long as those funds are being used towards a qualified educational expense, they are tax-free. So being mindful that we do have some residents that live outside of the state of North Carolina, that is still true. As long as those funds are being used towards qualified educational expenses, they are tax-free, but it's still important to meet with a tax advisor if you are not a NC North Carolina resident to make sure that you're maximizing the plan to your use. So when speaking of flexibility, so savings can be used really for anyone, anywhere. So if you are saving for your child or saving for a beneficiary, a loved one, and they want to, travel or maybe go internationally for college, those funds within that plan can be used. So it does come up pretty often that if I have an NC 529 plan, do I have to stay in the state of North Carolina? You do not have to. You can use these funds virtually anywhere. Also, pretty often you may have a child or a loved one that is saying, hey, my plans are possibly going to change and I'm no longer considering college as a pathway after high school. And if that is true, you have the flexibility to change beneficiaries. So if you have been saving for years, maybe for your child, and they're getting closer to the age of 16 and 17 and their plans have changed and they're no longer maybe considering a college as a pathway, you can choose to use those funds and transfer them to another beneficiary. So there's a number of ways to use funds, and we'll talk about that in the next few slides, but just know that there is that flexibility. When we're talking about funds associated within the plan, maybe you've chosen a risk level that maybe your plan is not growing into the hopes that you had. You do have the opportunity to reallocate funds up to twice each calendar year. So if you have a level of investment that maybe changes throughout the year, maybe you started off very conservative in the beginning and you want to be a little bit more aggressive, you do have the opportunity to do so. And we'll talk about how that works as well. So the plan is also comprehensive. So we have a number of investment options that really work closely with families, especially if they have specific objectives that they're looking to meet. So maybe, you've recently started saving within an NC 529 and you have a savings goal in mind. We're working closely with you to be able to provide investment options that align with those objectives. One that tends to come to mind is one of our Vanguard age-based tracks, right? That supports families that maybe start within a certain age and want to maximize their account by the time their child is kind of within the college going age, right? So possibly 18, 19 years or older. So we have different tracks that support families that are looking for an investment option that follows them by age, but there's also a different number investment options that match your tolerance of risk. So we'll talk about especially what those options look like, especially if you're on a more conservative track versus aggressive. So now we're going to talk a little bit about those qualified educational expenses. So how am I able to use the funds tax-free? So we have 7 qualified ways of using NC 529 funds. If you have plans to use funds for anything different than what's listed here, it may be considered a non-qualified expense, which would be a non-qualified withdrawal. So one thing to be mindful of is if these funds within this plan are being used for anything that is different, there is a 10% federal penalty tax on that withdrawal, as well as those withdrawals or those earnings are subject to state and federal taxes. So just something to be mindful of if at any time, life happens, if you are pulling money from an NC 529 plan for any unexpected expense that is not educational, it will have that 10% federal penalty tax as well as subject to state and federal taxes. But to discuss more about the qualified ways of using these funds, you hear most often with an NC 529 plan that those funds are being used towards college. So NC 529 funds can be used towards tuition, books, fees, room and board. Also, K through 12, you can use funds within the NC 529 plan to pay towards tuition if your child is pursuing a sector of K through 12 where there is a cost associated with attendance. So we'll talk about that specifically in the next slide. But also, we're mindful of the fact that not every child or not every beneficiary is planning for a 4-year degree. So if you have someone that's interested in a trade or an apprenticeship program, there is flexibility for individuals to be able to start saving specifically for trade school expenses, as well as any expenses associated with an apprenticeship program, as long as it's registered. You can use funds within the plan to pay for special needs equipment. So if you have a loved one, a beneficiary that relies on specific equipment, you can use the funds to pay towards that. And then most recently with newer legislation, there is the ability for you to use NC 529 funds to pay back on student loans. So you may even be asking yourself, well, what is the point of having student loans if I have the plan? And we'll talk about some kind of ideas that come to mind where you may have an individual that uses a student loan and they have a plan in place. So there may be an individual or a family that chooses to take student loans out and have a plan, but we'll talk about some of the flexibility with that. And then if there is an individual that has had this plan for quite some time and they're saying, hey, I'm coming to a place where, I have funds in this account and I've used them in every way possible. What are some other avenues I can look into? You are able to roll over any excess NC 529 funds into a Roth IRA for your beneficiary. So we'll talk specifically about what that looks like and especially some of the certain criteria that applies around that. So for K through 12 tuition, we do have individuals that use the NC 529 funds to pay towards tuition. So if you have a child that is pursuing public, private, or religious setting between elementary to high school, you can use up to $10,000 each calendar year to pay towards tuition at that school. So something to be mindful of. So maybe you're early on now and considering what K through 12 looks like for your loved one. If you are thinking about the private sector or any sector where there's a cost associated with the cost of attendance, you can use funds within the NC 529 plan for that purpose. So the Secure Act, and this is where we were talking a little bit about some of our newer legislation and how it allows you to use those funds. You are able to use NC 529 funds towards student loan repayment. So let's say, for example, you might have started your NC 529 plan for your child maybe in middle school or in high school, and you feel like maybe you did not have that kind of longer window of time to save. And you come across, a time maybe where your beneficiary is in college and they are having to make that decision to pull additional funding. So they may be taking out a student loan. If they're choosing to do so, they're probably doing that maybe because the funds are not readily available within their plan. But let's say over time, you've still been contributing to your NC 529 plan and you find that, hey, there's now this money set aside. You can use that money to then pay back on that student loan. And that is up to $10,000. That is the lifetime maximum of paying back on that loan for that beneficiary. But let's say it doesn't necessarily apply to your beneficiary. Maybe your beneficiary has a sibling that has student loans, right? Maybe an older sibling, or even a younger sibling. However that looks like for your family, you also have the flexibility to choose to use some of those NC 529 funds to pay back on that beneficiary's siblings' student loan. So a lot of flexibility in there, and something that most families are, wanting to know more information about. So if there are any specific questions about that directly, happy to answer. When we think about apprenticeship programs, and especially when we're thinking about adult learners and the fact that there's now a little bit more flexibility with the funds, if you are choosing to use NC 529 funds towards an apprenticeship program, it is to cover those expenses associated. So there may be certain equipment or certain gear that you have to purchase to be within that program. You can use the funds to pay towards those expenses. So let's say, for example, you might have had your NC 529 plan for quite some time, so at least 15 years, and you might have, done a few transfers, rollovers, and you still have funds in that account. You may choose to roll over those funds into a Roth IRA for your beneficiary. So the lifetime cap of that would not exceed $35,000. So each calendar year, you have the ability to contribute at least 7,000, but that is something that is in place for individuals that might have had their account for quite some time and want to start kind of building their beneficiary's future within an Roth IRA. So just something to be mindful of. So let's talk a little bit about the investment options that are associated with the NC 529 plan. So we do have the federally insured deposit account through State Employees Credit Union, which is one of our most conservative options for families. So especially if you're considering the NC 529 plan and the conversation of risk level comes up quite often for you and you're not so sure of what's going to work the best for your family, you may choose to use State Employees Credit Union as your level of investment within the NC 529 plan. And again, this is our most conservative option, and this is open to members and non-members of State Employees Credit Union. So there is that option here for families to consider, especially if they are looking to be on a more conservative side. Vanguard also has a number of age-based investment options that supports families depending on their child's age. So that ranges from being extremely conservative to being aggressive. So depending on your child's age, they are following that child up to the age of 19 years or older on a certain track that is maximizing the use of your plan. So just to give you an example, let's say you have a child that's 6 years old when you start the NC 529 plan, and you choose to be pretty conservative. If they are at the age of 6 and you are being conservative, as you can see here, the age of the beneficiary, 5 to 6 years old, you are going to be using the Vanguard Moderate Growth Portfolio, which means that when you are contributing to your account, 50% of your contribution is within stock, 50% of it is within bond, right? And if you consistently stay on that conservative track up until the age of 19 years or older, you will see that that track is showing you exactly where your contribution is going up until that age, right? So that's are just a few things to be mindful of. But again, let's say that your child, you want it to be on an aggressive track. And let's say you've started since they were a newborn. We'll go back to the previous slide. You can see here, as a newborn, if using the aggressive track, you are in this Vanguard aggressive growth portfolio where your contribution is 100% stock. And if you continue to be aggressive up until the age of 19 years old, you'll see that that changes. Now you're within a different track at that age. So you still have the flexibility. You don't have to stay on the same track all 19 years if you chose to start as a newborn, but you have the ability to change this up at least twice each calendar year. So we also have a number of individual investment options through Vanguard. So if you are someone that is interested in maybe creating a portfolio specific for your family, right? So maybe you want to do 25% of this or 50% of this, you have the ability to use a number of different investment options, these individual investment options to create a portfolio mix that works best for your family. So, what we'll jump into now is talking a little bit more about some saving strategies just to be mindful of as we're going into the summer, especially with school year coming to an end and the fall being right around the corner. Here's a few saving strategies just for you to consider as you're moving forward with the NC 529 plan. So milestone events. So I feel like pretty often kids are constantly celebrating something, right? So there are a number of events that we're always celebrating, and these could be ways that you may choose to contribute during your child's life. So religious events, birthdays, academic milestones. So maybe the transition from kindergarten to kindergarten to first grade, or maybe from middle school to high school. These are all very pivotal moments throughout your child's life that you may consider would be a perfect time to start contributing maybe a little bit more or making additional contributions to. So this is a great way for you to celebrate those milestone events. But also not only for you, but for family and friends to also be encouraged to save as well. So you may have, family and friends that you're having events all the time and maybe you're not able to make it. If that is the case, you have a specific and unique gifting link towards your beneficiary. So when those moments are coming around, birthdays or academic milestones, and you're celebrating, and you may have individuals that, can't attend or would like to send something but not really sure what to send, you can have this specific gifting link sent out to family and friends, and you can encourage them to get a part of the conversation and contribute to your child's NC 529 plan. So there is a lot of flexibility with that. The service fee on using that system is fairly low. It's about $1.99 if you're using that gifting link, but it approves and uses most debit cards and credit unions. So if you want to make those contributions, you can send it to family and friends, and they can choose to contribute how much or how often that they like specific from that gifting link. So just something to be mindful of in a way to get family and friends also a part of the conversation. You may have an employer that has a scholarship program. You may have your child apply for that program. And if so, if they are selected, you can choose to use any of those funds associated to go into your NC 529 plan. And also something to think about a lot more is the fact that when we're coming across bonuses and merits and things that are happening, you may have additional income, right? Thinking of ways to maybe contribute more to your NC 529 plan, depending on kind of raises and things that transpire throughout the year, maybe for yourself or even for your partner. So just a few things to put into perspective. And then also you may have an employer that is willing to contribute to your child's NC 529 or match. So it's a really great time to start having those conversations, especially with HR, if you want to look into it being a benefit not only for yourself, but for employees within your organization. You can have those conversations to say, hey, NC 529 has a payroll deduction program, and we are able to have this as a benefit to encourage, families within your organization to also save. So really cool ways to get your employer involved. You might come across windfall events, right? So you might across unexpected gifts or inheritance. And when you have this money coming, you may not necessarily think so often about putting it into a NC 529 plan. So if you are to come across this in the future and you want to contribute, you're more than welcome. And it's strongly encouraged to think of this as an opportunity to start contributing more to your child's NC 529 plan or your beneficiaries plan. So on our website, we do have a NC 529 savings calculator. So this calculator is in place to support families that have questions about what future education looks like. So you may have more than one beneficiary that you're saving for, and you may be considering, well, what is college going to potentially cost in the future? This calculator supports you in allowing you to add a number of beneficiaries, put their current grade level, and also where they plan to attend college, right? So we know that as they're fairly young, it's probably going to be hard to say whether or not they're going to be in state or out of state. Whereas we have some families that are like, no, they're definitely staying in state. So regardless of what that looks like, you're able to actually put into this calculator whether or not they possibly will pursue a 4-year in-state degree versus a 4-year out-of-state. And you can kind of track what the difference over time will look like, and it will support you in understanding what your saving strategy should be. So we'll estimate the tuition inflation over the years, potentially what the future costs of college will be across 4 years. And then you can go into the calculator and say about how much you plan to save out of those 4 years versus what you potentially hope to receive in regards to financial aid. So this is a really cool tool that's at your benefit. You do not have to actively have the plan to use this calculator. It is a free resource on our CFNC website. So please feel free, even after today's call, if you want to spend some time on that calculator and just kind of figure out what that looks like, more than welcome to do so. So let's talk a little bit about upcoming events that are on the schedule for NC 529. So if you are currently a participant of the plan or heavily considering opening an NC 529 plan, we are running a sweepstakes. It's been running since May 1st and it will close this Saturday. So it is a really great time for you to go ahead and register for this sweepstakes if you have not done so already. You can register online at cfnc.org/NC529. It'll take you directly to the Dream Chasers sweepstake. There is a banner on the website to get you there, but there's a number of ways to be entered into the giveaway. So I think that this is a really cool opportunity for you all to consider, especially if you're either in the plan already or heavily considering it. One person will be chosen to win $1,529 as a contribution into their account. So really great opportunity to look into. You may also be someone that is planning to withdraw funds pretty soon. So maybe you have a beneficiary that is looking within the K through 12 sector and you're planning to withdraw those funds for tuition. Or you may have a child that's going to college in the next few years and you're just really curious to know, I've never done a withdrawal from my account. What does this consist of? What's needed? So this will be a really great opportunity for you to join us next Thursday. We'll be meeting in a very similar space as today at 11 a.m. to talk about withdrawing funds within the NC 529 plan. So just some ways for you to keep up with NC 529. You can access the account online at cfnc.org/NC529. It is easy enrollment. There's no cost with enrolling into the NC 529 plan. The only thing is that $25 minimum contribution anytime you are contributing to the account. You always will have access to account information as well as maintenance. So that is at your fingertips, regardless of how you are contributing. So if you, for example, are contributing through your employer, through payroll deduction is just making it easier for you to contribute to your account. You still have full access and disclosure to your account to see how your account is growing over time. So you will always have that access. You can look at our frequently asked questions online, very similar to maybe questions that come up during webinars or calls that we maybe receive in our call center to kind of get quick responses to some of the questions that you may have. And then, as I just shared, that savings calculator is a really great tool for you to use, a really great way for you to start to, think about what future education will look like, so that you can prepare for it. And again, we do have a call center here in Raleigh, North Carolina, that allows you to call at any time anytime, not anytime, but Monday through Friday, Monday through Thursday, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., and then Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. But we do have their contact information here for you as well. They are located in Raleigh if you need to speak to someone, but also if you would like to come in and do a visit, that is open and available as well. And specific account questions that you may have, they will be able to support you. So this is all of our contact information. I've also included my contact information, my email address for you to connect with me, especially if you have questions about things that I might have mentioned during today's webinar or even within payroll deduction when we're talking about, getting your employers involved. This is a great way for you to connect with us, but also with myself. And I do want to open up the space now for questions since we're coming to a close. So I will stop sharing my screen. And we will see if we have any questions. And what I'm going to do is actually allow us to go through this Q&A. The chat box is disabled, so we'll create the space for that now. So we do have a few questions coming through the Q&A. So if you are able to utilize the Q&A, I am able to see those questions. So what I will do now is go through those and answer them. But as well, if you want to use the Q&A, please feel free to go in there and I will answer those now. So I do see the direct payroll deduction. Um, so yes, you can have your employers opt in to offer NC 529 as a part of their benefits package. So if you have any specific questions about how to do so, I will allow you within the contact information that I just shared, you are more than able to connect with me and we can talk about how to get your employer set up. Does an educational program fit into any of these? So as long as they are falling within the 7 qualified ways of using NC 529 funds, you can use those funds. So if it's an international program, if it is an online program, if it falls within those 7 qualified ways of using funds, you're more than able to do so. Has a number, let's see. How can we access the Vanguard age strategy? So Vanguard does have those age-based tracks. You can go on our website on cfnc.org/NC529. We do have those investment options within our website, so more than able to go through those investment options and look specifically at those age-based tracks. Is there a limit? So there is a maximum contribution limit. It cannot exceed past $550,000 within an NC 529 plan. That is the maximum. Can I use 529 funds to pay back on my own existing student loans? So as your beneficiary, as you are the participant of the plan, if your beneficiary has student loans, you can use those funds to pay back on that beneficiary's student loans as well as their siblings. So it can only be used for the beneficiary's purpose. Is there a limit on how much can be rolled over to a Roth IRA? Great question. You can't contribute any more than $35,000 into a Roth IRA, but there is a maximum contribution limit of $7,000 a year. Where can we find the slides for June's 5th webinar? So each webinar will be recorded and shared on our YouTube page. So if you are following College for North Carolina on YouTube, any webinar that we're hosting throughout the year will be uploaded in that space. Who has control of the money once my child turns 18? Great question. So as the participant, you are the owner of the plan. So your child, when they age to 18 or 19 years old, they're never receiving authority of the account. You are always going to be the account owner as the participant. Can you transfer from another 529 account into an NC 529 account? Yes, you can. So if you have a pre-existing 529 account that maybe you started in another state, you are more than welcome to roll over those funds into an NC 529 plan. If funds remain in the 529 account after one child graduates college, can they be transferred into the siblings 529 account? Yes, that is a great question. So you may have a beneficiary that chooses not to use all those funds. Let's say, for example, you have a child that maybe you were planning to, they were planning for a 4-year degree, and maybe their plans changed and they're now looking at taking on a trade, which is obviously the cost are two different things. So maybe you will have excess funds in one account. You can roll over those funds to another beneficiary. Great question. How do I register for June 5th's webinar? So if you go to cfnc.org/events, you will find the events page for all webinars being hosted by CFNC. So you can register for that webinar on that webpage. Will access to a 529 plan affect the opportunity to apply for college scholarships in the future? Great question. So 529 plans are not necessarily related to the use of scholarships. So I would still encourage your child that even with a 529 plan to still seek additional scholarships, additional aid. So it does not have a direct impact on scholarship use. If you contribute through payroll deduction, can you make additional contributions through the website? Yes, you can. You can always make additional contributions. Also, another thing that comes up pretty often is the fact that the gifting link is very accessible. And sometimes we have individuals that use the gifting link as ways to contribute. So even as you're sending it to family and friends, you can also utilize it in other ways. So just something to think about. We have an 18-year-old grandchild going to college this year. Can we make a contribution to a NC 529 account, and what is the maximum contribution per year? So yes, regardless of age, you can always open an NC 529 account at any age. So if you want to open it for a grandchild that's potentially going off to college in the next few years, you are more than welcome to do so. There is a maximum contribution limit, 550,000, and that is just to say you cannot exceed your account past that. So definitely would still encourage, regardless at any age, you can still open an NC 529 account. Okay. So here's a question. I have heard that if a child has a 529 account that they are not allowed to apply for financial aid. That is not accurate. So you can still apply for financial aid with a NC 529 account. It is considered a parental asset on the FAFSA form. So it is reported, but it does not hold as much weight, but it does not keep you away from submitting the FAFSA form. So I would still encourage submitting the FAFSA. Great questions. How do we make sure we are at the appropriate risk level for our child? Where can we adjust that? So definitely that is where having conversations with the tax advisor would be important of kind of figuring out what your saving strategy is, especially given their age. So if you are someone that maybe you started your NC 529 plan while your child was maybe in middle school or in high school, and you really want to maximize your efforts between now and then, that would be where having a conversation, a specific conversation with a tax advisor would be appropriate. But again, we do have those investment options on our website. So you're more than able to go through those and look at what really works best for you. And again, you can always change that risk level at least twice a year. Can the NC 529 funds be used for graduate school? That is a great question. Yes, they can. Can 529 be started for a child that is not biologically related to you? Yes, you can open an NC 529 plan for anyone. Can you have both parents on the account, or is it one parent as the account owner? So yes, great question. It is one account owner within the account for the NC 529 plan, but you can also add a successor. And that comes into the conversation for that. If any reason you are no longer able to manage that account, there is someone that is assigned to that account if you are not able to do so. So another question just came in. You cannot get a tax deduction on the contributions to a 529. That is correct. So in the state of North Carolina, we do not have tax deductions on the NC 529 plan. Those earnings on the earnings on within the plan, as long as those are being used towards educational expenses, they are tax-free. But yes, there is no deduction. All right. Well, those look to be most of the questions in our Q&A. Very great questions here. I'm going to allow maybe for another minute or two in case there's anyone with a question that they're finishing up so that I can answer that. But we really appreciate you all being here with us today, celebrating 529 Day with us. And again, if you have any questions specific to the NC 529 plan, we do have a call center here in Raleigh, North Carolina, but you also have my contact information as well. So feel free to connect. And I'm also going to hang back just for another minute